The human ship moved quietly through space, its lights blinking softly in the darkness. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, watching the stars through the large window. He had been exploring space for 15 years, but he still loved the sight of distant suns. "Captain, we're picking up something strange," called out Lieutenant Steve Parker from his control station. His fingers moved quickly over the glowing buttons. "There are ships ahead of us. Big ones." Jake walked over to look at the screen. He saw 3 massive ships, each one 10 times larger than his own vessel. They were dark gray with sharp edges and looked like they were built for war. "Are they sending any signals?" "Nothing we can understand, sir," Steve replied. "The computer can't figure out their language." Dr. Lisa Carter looked up from her science station. She was a ship's expert on alien life, though she had never actually met any aliens before. "Captain, these ships don't match any design in our databases. I think we just made first contact." Jake felt his heart beat faster. For 50 years, humans had been exploring space, hoping to find other intelligent life. Now it seemed they finally had. "Open a channel. Let's try to talk to them." Before Steve could respond, the alien ships moved. They were fast, much faster than the human ship. In seconds, they surrounded the New Horizon. Bright beams of energy shot out and hit the human vessel, but instead of destroying it, the beams seemed to grab it. "They are pulling us in," reported Chief Engineer Ryan Blake from the engine room. His voice came through the speaker, calm but worried. "I can't break free. Their technology is way ahead of ours." The largest alien ship opened like a giant mouth. The New Horizon was pulled inside, and heavy doors closed behind them. Jake looked around at his crew of 200 people. They were scared, but they trusted him to keep them safe. "Stay calm, everyone," Jake said over the ship's communication system. "We don't know what they want yet. Let's not make them angry." The aliens came aboard 30 minutes later. They were tall, maybe 7 feet, with blue skin and 4 arms. Their heads were larger than human heads, and their eyes were completely black. They wore dark armor and carried weapons that hummed with energy. The leader stepped forward. When he spoke, a small device on his belt made his words into English. "I am Admiral Vextar of the Zephyrian Empire. You are now prisoners of the Empire." Jake stepped forward slowly, keeping his hands where the alien could see them. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison. We didn't know this was your space. We're explorers, not soldiers." Admiral Vextar looked at Jake like he was looking at an insect. "Your species is new to us. You will tell us about your home planet, your military strength, and your technology." "We're peaceful people," Jake said. "We just want to learn about the galaxy and make friends with other species." The Admiral made a sound that might have been laughter. "All primitive species say that. Then they try to fight us, and then they die. It is always the same." Dr. Carter spoke up. "We really are peaceful. Humans have stopped fighting wars on our own planet. We explore space to learn, not to conquer." "Humans," Admiral Vextar repeated the word slowly. "Weak bones, small muscles, only 2 arms. How did such a pathetic species even reach space?" Ryan Blake had been quiet, but Jake could see him thinking hard. The engineer was probably trying to figure out how to send a message back to Earth. "Our technology might surprise you," Jake said calmly. "We're good at solving problems." "Are you threatening me?" Admiral Vextar's voice became dangerous. Jake shook his head. "No, sir. I'm just saying that attacking Earth would be inadvisable. We don't want to fight, but we're very good at ending fights when we have to." The alien admiral stared at Jake for a long moment. Then he turned to his soldiers and spoke in his own language. The translation device didn't work for his words, but his tone was clear. He was giving orders. "You will watch," Admiral Vextar said to Jake. "Your ship will be destroyed as an example to your species. Other humans will learn what happens when primitive races enter Zephyrian space." Jake felt cold inside, but he kept his face calm. "You're making a mistake. Humans don't forget their friends, and they don't forget their enemies either." "Your threats mean nothing," the Admiral said. "In 1 hour, your ship and everyone on it will be space dust. The recording will be sent to every world in this sector. Other species will see what happens to those who challenge the Empire." The aliens left them locked on their own bridge. Jake looked at his crew. They were afraid, but they still looked to him for hope. "Ryan," Jake said quietly, "tell me you got a message out." The engineer nodded slightly. "Already done. Captain, Earth will know what happened here." Dr. Carter was studying reading from her instruments. "Captain, I don't think they understand us at all. They think we're like every other species they've conquered." Jake watched through the window as alien ships moved into position around them. In the distance, he could see other vessels gathering to watch the execution. "They're about to learn something new about humans," Jake said softly. "We might not be the strongest or the fastest, but we remember everything. And when we solve a problem, we make sure it stays solved." 3 months had passed since the New Horizon disappeared. Earth's communication centers had been listening for any signal from Captain Morrison's ship, but there was only silence. Then, on a cold Tuesday morning, the message arrived. Lieutenant Karen Webb was working the night shift at the Deep Space Communications Center when her computer started beeping frantically. The signal was weak and broken, but it was definitely from the New Horizon. She called her supervisor immediately. "Get me the president's office," she said, her hand shaking as she worked to clean up the signal. "This is bigger than anything we've ever dealt with." President Amanda Rodriguez was having breakfast when the call came. She listened to the recorded message 3 times before speaking. Captain Morrison's voice was calm, but his words were terrifying. Aliens had found them. The aliens were hostile. The ship was about to be destroyed. "Call an emergency meeting," she told her assistant. "Get me the Global Defense Council. Everyone. Now." 2 hours later, the most important people on Earth sat around a large table in the underground command center. President Rodriguez looked at each face. These were the people who would decide humanity's response to their first contact with alien life. General Marcus Stone was the head of Earth's military forces. He was a big man with gray hair who had fought in the last war between nations 30 years ago. Next to him sat Admiral Helen Cross, who commanded all of Earth's spaceships. She was younger but just as experienced. Director Paul Griffin ran Earth's intelligence services. He knew secrets that could make governments fall. Dr. Sam Taylor was there too. He studied how different groups of people thought and acted. If anyone could understand alien minds, it would be him. "Play the message again," General Stone said. They listened to Ryan Blake's broken transmission. His voice cut in and out, but the important parts were clear. The aliens called themselves the Zephyrian Empire. They had huge ships and advanced weapons. They thought humans were weak and primitive. They were going to destroy the New Horizon as an example to scare other species. "They didn't even try to talk," Admiral Cross said angrily. "They just decided to kill our people." Dr. Taylor was taking notes on his tablet. "This fits a pattern we see in human history. Aggressive empires that expand by conquering weaker groups. They probably do this to every new species they meet." Director Griffin pulled up a star map on the big screen. "We don't know where they are or how many ships they have. For all we know, they could be heading to Earth right now." President Rodriguez stood up. "What are our options?" General Stone spoke first. "We could try to negotiate. Send a message saying we want peace." "They already showed us what they think of peace," Admiral Cross replied. "They killed 200 of our people without even asking questions." Dr. Taylor looked up from his notes. "Based on their behavior, I don't think negotiation will work. They see us as insects. You don't negotiate with insects." "So what do we do?" President Rodriguez asked. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Admiral Cross spoke slowly. "We could fight them." "With what?" General Stone asked. "They have technology that's years ahead of ours. Our best weapons might not even scratch their ships." Director Griffin was studying something on his tablet. "Maybe we don't need to scratch their ships. Every empire has weak points. Supply lines, communication networks, important planets they need to protect." Dr. Taylor nodded. "That's the key difference. They think like an empire. They fight battles to control territory. But we don't want territory. We just want them to stop being a threat." President Rodriguez sat back down, explained that most species probably fight them the way they expect. Dr. Taylor said, "Ship against ship, army against army. When they lose, they surrender and become part of the empire. But what if we don't fight their military at all? Admiral Cross leaned forward. You're talking about total war. I'm talking about ending the problem, Dr. Taylor corrected. If the Zephyrian Empire is a threat, then the Empire has to stop existing. The room went quiet again. These were not people who made decisions lightly. They had all seen what war could do. General Stone finally spoke. That would mean targeting their entire civilization, not just their military. Their entire civilization just murdered 200 innocent explorers, Admiral Cross said coldly. They recorded it to scare other species. They are proud of what they did. Director Griffin was already thinking ahead. We would need to know everything about them. Their technology, their planets, their weaknesses. This would take years to plan. Then we better start now, President Rodriguez said. But I want to be clear about something. This isn't about revenge. This is about making sure they never do this to anyone else. Dr. Taylor was writing again. We need to understand their psychology. They think they are dealing with a primitive species that will either surrender or fight a hopeless battle. They have no idea what humans do when someone hurts their family. Admiral Cross stood up. I'll start converting our exploration fleet. We're going to need ships, lots of them. I'll handle intelligence gathering, Director Griffin said. We need to know everything about them before we move. General Stone looked grim. This is going to change everything. Once we do this, the galaxy will know that humans are dangerous. President Rodriguez nodded. Good. Maybe that will keep this from happening again. As the meeting ended, Dr. Taylor made one final note. The Zephyrians had made a simple mistake. They thought they were dealing with just another weak species that would beg for mercy or die trying to fight them. They had no idea they had just declared war on a species that didn't fight wars. Humans solve problems. And the Zephyrian Empire had just become a problem that needed to be solved permanently. The message went out that afternoon to every government on Earth. It was short and simple. Prepare for total mobilization. We have work to do. 2 years had passed since the emergency meeting. Earth looked completely different now. Every factory, every research lab, every resource was focused on one goal. The planet had become a machine built for one purpose, ending the Zephyrian threat forever. Dr. Claire Foster stood in her new laboratory, watching her team work on technologies that didn't exist 3 years ago. She had been a simple physics professor before the New Horizon was destroyed. Now she led the most important research project in human history. The new engines are ready for testing, her assistant Tony Chen called out. He was young but brilliant, like most of the people working on the project. We're getting twice the speed of our old ships. Claire nodded. Speed wasn't enough, though. They needed ships that could appear anywhere in the galaxy without warning. Ships that could strike and vanish before the enemy knew what hit them. Across the city, Brandon Mills was transforming his car factory into something else entirely. The assembly lines that once built civilian vehicles now produce weapons, armor, and ship parts. Every day, thousands of workers arrive to build the tools of war. We're ahead of schedule, his production manager Kate Lee reported. The new factories in Asia and Europe are coming online next month. We'll be able to build 50 ships per week. Brandon looked at the numbers on his screen. 50 ships per week for 2 years. The Zephyrians had no idea what was coming for them. Good. Make it 75 ships per week. We're not just building a fleet. We're building the end of their empire. Meanwhile, Captain Amy Johnson was farther from Earth than any human had ever traveled. Her ship was small and invisible to most sensors. She had been mapping Zephyrian space for 18 months, gathering information that would make the difference between victory and defeat. There's another supply depot here, she whispered to her navigator, Lieutenant Bob Hayes. They had to whisper. Even though their ship was hidden, they couldn't take chances. Mark it on the map. Bob's fingers moved quietly over his controls. That makes 4 to 7 major supply stations. They really don't expect anyone to attack their rear areas. Amy smiled grimly. The Zephyrians were like most bullies. They were strong when attacking weaker opponents, but they had never faced someone who could hit back. Their entire empire was built around the idea that their enemies would fight them face to face. They were wrong. Back on Earth, Agent Danny Walsh was learning to think like a Zephyrian. He had been studying their language, their culture, and their military tactics for 2 years. He knew how they thought, how they made decisions, and most importantly, how they could be defeated. Their communication system has a central hub, he explained to Director Griffin. Every message in their empire goes through 3 main relay stations. If we take those out, their entire empire goes deaf and blind. Director Griffin marked the locations on his map. What about their leadership? They are arrogant, Danny replied. The Emperor and his top commanders all live on the capital world. They think they are safe because no one has ever attacked their home planet. They have defenses, but they are designed to stop conventional attacks. And we're not planning a conventional attack, Director Griffin said with satisfaction. The most important work was being done by Lieutenant Commander Grace Perry. She was writing the plan that would end the Zephyrian Empire in a single day. Grace had studied every war in human history, every successful military campaign, every devastating defeat. The key is simultaneity, she explained to Admiral Cross. We don't attack their military and then their civilians. We don't capture territory and then move forward. We hit everything at once. Admiral Cross studied the battle plan. It was unlike anything ever attempted in human history. This isn't a war plan. This is an execution plan. Exactly, Grace replied. Wars can be lost. Executions can't. The plan was simple in concept but massive in scale. Human forces would appear simultaneously in every important Zephyrian system. They wouldn't fight the Zephyrian fleet. Instead, they would destroy everything the fleet needed to function. Shipyards, fuel depots, communication arrays, government centers, manufacturing plants. In one coordinated strike, the Zephyrian Empire would cease to exist. Their ships would be left floating in space with no fuel, no orders, no purpose, and no empire to serve. Captain Amy Johnson sent her final intelligence report back to Earth. She had mapped every important target in Zephyrian space. 4 to 7 major systems, 312 critical installations, and 1 capital world that had never been threatened in 1,000 years. Mission complete, she transmitted. All targets identified and catalogued. Recommend immediate implementation of final solution. On Earth, the last ships rolled off the production lines. Dr. Foster's new weapons were loaded onto vessels that could cross the galaxy in weeks instead of years. Soldiers who had trained for 2 years prepared to board ships that would take them farther from home than humans had ever traveled. President Rodriguez stood in the command center, looking at the massive display that showed human forces scattered across the galaxy. In 6 hours, they would all move at once. The Zephyrian Empire had existed for over 1,000 years. In 6 hours and 12 minutes, it would be history. Are we ready? She asked Admiral Cross. We've been ready for months, the Admiral replied. Every ship is in position. Every target is confirmed. Every soldier knows their job. Dr. Taylor made his final psychological assessment. The Zephyrians still think we're a primitive species. Their intelligence reports describe us as technically inferior but surprisingly persistent. They expect us to attack their border worlds and fight a long, hopeless war. Instead, President Rodriguez asked. Instead, we're going to solve the problem, Dr. Taylor said simply. By tomorrow morning, there won't be a Zephyrian Empire to fight. The countdown began. Across the galaxy, human forces waited in the darkness between stars. They carried the names of 200 dead explorers into battle. Captain Morrison and his crew would be remembered, but more importantly, they would be avenged. The Zephyrians had taught humanity an important lesson about the galaxy. It was a dangerous place filled with hostile empires that killed first and asked questions never. Now humanity was about to teach the galaxy something about humans. When humans said something was inadvisable, they weren't making a threat. They were giving fair warning. The warning period was over. Admiral Vextar stood on the bridge of his new flagship, the Eternal Conquest. The ship was even larger than his previous vessel, a reward for his quick handling of the human problem 3 years ago. He looked out at the stars and felt satisfied with his life. The human incident had made him famous throughout the Empire. Other admirals asked him about the strange species that had shown no fear even while being destroyed. Vextar always told the same story. The humans had been primitive and weak, but they had refused to beg for mercy. It made for good entertainment at military gatherings. Admiral, called his communications officer, Lieutenant Kelvor. We're receiving the daily reports from the outer sectors. Vextar nodded. 3 more star systems have been added to the Empire this year. The Zephyrian war machine continued its unstoppable expansion across the galaxy. Every species they encountered followed the same pattern. First, they tried to negotiate. Then they fought a hopeless war. Finally, they surrendered and became part of the Empire. It had been this way for over 1,000 years. Emperor Kothak sat on his golden throne, listening to reports from across his vast empire. The palace was built from the treasures of 100 conquered worlds. Each room displayed the wealth and power of the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known. The mining operations on Kexelo are ahead of schedule, reported Minister Veltak. The local population has adapted well to their new role in the empire. The emperor barely listened. He had heard similar reports thousands of times. Species were conquered, their resources taken, their people put to work for the empire. It was a natural order of the galaxy. The strong ruled, the weak served. The human incident from 3 years ago had been mentioned in his daily briefings exactly once. A primitive species had been encountered and eliminated. It was so routine that he had forgotten about it within days. Commander Zalin was different from her fellow officers. She had been on Admiral Vextar's old ship when they destroyed the human vessel. Unlike the others, she couldn't forget what she had seen. The human captain had been calm even when facing death. He had warned them that attacking his people would be inadvisable. Most species made threats when they were afraid, but this human had seemed genuinely concerned for the Zephyrian safety. "Commander, you're thinking about the humans again," observed her second officer, Lieutenant Mordau. He had served with her for 5 years and could read her moods. "Something about that encounter still bothers me," Zalin admitted. "They didn't act like other primitive species. They weren't afraid, and they weren't angry. They were just sad. Sad for themselves." Mordau asked. "No," Zalin said slowly. "Sad for us." Mordau laughed. "They were about to die, and they felt sorry for the mighty Zephyrian Empire? That makes no sense." Zalin couldn't explain why, but she had the feeling they were missing something important about humans. She had suggested sending scouts to locate the human homeworld, but her superiors weren't interested. The humans were dead. The matter was closed. Intelligence Officer Mektar was studying the latest report from the border sectors when he noticed something strange. His instruments had been detecting unusual energy readings for several months. The readings didn't match any known technology, and they appeared at the edge of Zephyrian space before disappearing. "Probably just stellar phenomena," his assistant suggested when Mektar showed him the data. "Space is full of strange energy patterns." Mektar wasn't convinced, but he had no proof that the readings meant anything. He filed the reports and moved on to more pressing matters. The Empire was planning to conquer the Altian cluster, and they needed intelligence on the local defenses. The Zephyrian military was focused on their next expansion. General Corvan was reviewing the invasion plans with his staff. The Altarians had a small fleet and primitive weapons. The conquest should be complete within weeks. "The Altarians have already sent surrender messages," reported Colonel Nextar. "They are offering to become protectorate without fighting." General Corvan was disappointed. Another species that gives up without a battle. Where's the glory in that? "At least it saves resources," Colonel Nextar pointed out. "We can move on to more interesting targets." The Zephyrians had grown so used to easy victories that they had become careless. Their long history of success had made them believe they were invincible. No species had ever seriously threatened their empire. No enemy had ever struck at their home worlds. Their entire military doctrine was based on overwhelming force applied to weak opponents. They had never faced an enemy that could match their technology or an opponent that fought total war instead of traditional battles. Deep in the Imperial archives, automated systems recorded the daily activities of the Empire. Troop movements, supply shipments, communication traffic, and industrial production were all carefully tracked. The Zephyrians were efficient administrators as well as conquerors. What they didn't realize was that this efficiency had made them predictable. Every ship movement was logged. Every supply depot was catalogued. Every important facility was documented. The Empire's own record-keeping had created a perfect map for anyone who wanted to destroy it. Admiral Vextar was promoted to Supreme Fleet Commander at a ceremony on the capital world. Thousands of officers attended the celebration. The Emperor himself presented Vextar with a star of conquest for his many victories. "The Empire grows stronger every day," the Emperor declared. "Our enemies tremble before our might, and our friends prosper under our protection." The crowd cheered. They had heard similar speeches at hundreds of ceremonies. The Zephyrian Empire was eternal and unstoppable. Their technology was advanced, their military was powerful, and their enemies were weak and primitive. In the outer sectors, patrol ships continued their routine sweeps of the border systems. They were looking for new species to conquer or pirates to destroy. They weren't looking for invasion fleets because no species had ever been foolish enough to attack the Zephyrian Empire directly. Commander Zalin had been assigned to one of these patrols. As her ship moved through empty space, she thought about the human captain's final words. He had seemed so certain that attacking his people was a mistake. But humans were gone now, wiped out 3 years ago. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The galaxy seemed too quiet lately. She had no way of knowing that human ships were positioned throughout Zephyrian space, waiting in the darkness between stars. She couldn't detect the advanced stealth technology that hid entire fleets from her sensors. The Zephyrians continued their normal routines, planning new conquests and celebrating past victories. They had no idea that their empire was about to end. They had forgotten about the humans, but the humans had not forgotten about them. The countdown continued, ticking toward 0. In a few hours, the Zephyrian Empire would discover what happened when someone hurt humanity's family. They were about to learn that humans always kept their promises. The attack began at exactly midnight, Earth time. Across 4 to 7 star systems, human ships appeared from the darkness like ghosts becoming real. 3 years of planning and preparation came together in a single, devastating moment. Admiral Helen Cross sat in the command center on Earth, watching dozens of screens that showed the beginning of the end. Each screen displayed a different Zephyrian system. Each system was about to learn what happened when humans solved a problem. "All units report ready," came the voice of Captain Amy Johnson from her position near the Zephyrian capital. "Targets confirmed. Beginning operation." "Execute," Admiral Cross said simply. In the Kepler system, human ships bypassed a massive Zephyrian defense fleet entirely. While the alien warship prepared for a traditional battle that never came, human forces struck the orbital shipyards. The facilities that had built warships for 300 years vanished in brilliant flashes of light. Commander Zalin watched in horror from her patrol ship as the shipyards exploded. "What's happening?" she shouted to her crew. "Where did those ships come from?" Before anyone could answer, the human ships were gone, jumping to their next target. They left behind nothing but wreckage and confused Zephyrian forces. In the Vega system, the pattern repeated. Human forces appeared, destroyed the communication relay station, and vanished before the local defense fleet could respond. The station that had coordinated communications for an entire sector went silent in seconds. Lieutenant Kelvor was working late in the Imperial Communications Center when his screen started going dark. "Admiral Vextar," he called frantically. "We're losing contact with the outer systems." Admiral Vextar rushed to the communication center. Half the screen showed nothing but static. "Equipment failure?" he asked. "No, sir," Kelvor replied, his voice shaking. "The relay stations are gone. Someone is destroying them." The attacks continued across Zephyrian space. Supply depots that fed entire fleets disappeared in explosions visible from neighboring planets. Manufacturing centers that produced weapons and equipment for the Empire were reduced to debris. Administrative buildings where governors ruled conquered worlds were turned to ash. The human strategy was simple and terrifying. They weren't fighting the Zephyrian military. They were dismantling the infrastructure that made the military possible. On the Zephyrian capital world, Emperor Korthak was awakened by his guards. "Your Majesty, we have an emergency," General Corvan said urgently. "We're under attack." The Emperor rushed to his command center, still wearing his sleeping robes. The great display that normally showed his vast empire was flickering with warning lights. System after system was reporting critical infrastructure destroyed. "Who dares attack the Empire?" the Emperor demanded. "We don't know," General Corvan admitted. "The attacks are simultaneous across dozens of systems. No single fleet could cover this much territory." Intelligence Officer Mektar was studying the attack patterns when he realized something that made his blood freeze. "Those energy signatures," he whispered. "I've seen them before. In the border reports from the past 2 years." "What are you talking about?" Admiral Vextar demanded. The strange readings were detected. Mektar said. They weren't stellar phenomena. They were ships. Ships we couldn't identify because we'd never seen their technology before. The truth hit Admiral Vextar like a physical blow. The humans, he said quietly. Impossible. General Corven protested. We destroyed them 3 years ago. We destroyed one ship, Admiral Vextar corrected. We never found their homeworld. Captain Amy Johnson's fleet approached the Zephyrian capital system. Unlike every other target, this one was heavily defended. Thousands of warships protected the heart of the Empire, but the humans didn't plan to fight those ships. Target the orbital platforms, Amy ordered. Ignore the fleet. The human ships moved faster than anything the Zephyrians had ever seen. They slipped between the massive defense ships like shadows, striking at the space stations that supplied and coordinated the capital's defenses. The Zephyrian fleet tried to respond, but they were too slow and too confused. Their enemy wasn't behaving like any opponent they had ever faced. Instead of engaging in ship-to-ship combat, the humans were systematically destroying everything the fleet needed to function. They are not fighting us. Commander Zalin realized as she watched the battle from a distant patrol ship. They're erasing us. The attack on the capital was the most devastating yet. The humans destroyed every orbital facility, every ground-based manufacturing center, and every government building in the capital city. The palace where Emperor Korthak had ruled for 50 years was reduced to rubble. But they didn't kill the emperor. They didn't need to. Without his empire, he was just an old man in expensive clothes. The coordination was perfect. Every human ship knew exactly where to go and what to destroy. 3 years of intelligence gathering had mapped every critical facility in Zephyrian space. Grace Perry's tactical plan was being executed flawlessly. In 6 hours, the Zephyrian Empire lost every major shipyard, every communication hub, every supply depot, and every administrative center. Their vast fleet found itself stranded without fuel, supplies, or orders. Admiral Vextar stood in his command center, watching his empire die on the screens around him. Communication with most systems had been cut. The few reports still coming in all said the same thing. Critical infrastructure destroyed. Attackers vanished. How many ships do they have? He asked weakly. Unknown, Mektar replied. Our sensors can barely detect them. They appear, attack, and disappear before we can respond. Estimates range from hundreds of thousands, General Corven added. But that's impossible. No species could build that many advanced ships in secret. But humans had done exactly that. For 3 years, every factory on Earth had worked toward this moment. Every scientist had developed new technologies. Every engineer had built ships designed for one purpose, ending the Zephyrian threat permanently. The empire that had existed for over 1,000 years was collapsing in a single day. Not because their military was defeated in battle, but because their civilization was being systematically dismantled. Commander Zalin tried to contact a superior for orders, but found only silence. The communication networks that had connected the empire were gone. Her ship and thousands of others were alone in space, with no infrastructure to support them and no empire to serve. Commander, her navigation officer said quietly, "What are our orders?" Zalin looked at the stars around her ship. Somewhere out there, human forces were completing their work. The species that Admiral Vextar had dismissed as primitive and weak had just accomplished something no enemy had ever managed. They had killed an empire in a single day. "I don't know," she admitted. "I don't think we have orders in them all." The Zephyrian Empire was ending exactly as the human captain had warned it would. Not in a glorious battle, but in a swift, efficient solution to a problem. The humans had kept their promise. When they said attacking Earth was inadvisable, they hadn't been making a threat. 72 hours after the attack began, the Zephyrian Empire was a name without meaning. Admiral Vextar sat in his dark command center, staring at screens that showed nothing but static. The communication networks that had once connected 3 spiral arms of the galaxy were gone. "Status report," he said automatically, though he knew no one could answer. "All major systems are dark," Lieutenant Kelvor replied quietly. "We have no contact with Fleet Command, no supply lines, and no orders from the capital." Vextar's flagship drifted in space with nowhere to go. His fuel reserve were running low, and the nearest supply depot had been destroyed 2 days ago. Around him, hundreds of other Zephyrian ships faced the same problem. They were a fleet without purpose, soldiers without a war to fight. On the capital world, Emperor Kuthak stood in the ruins of his palace. The golden throne room was open to the sky now, its roof blown away by human weapons. The emperor still wore his royal robes, but they were torn and dainty. His empire was gone, but somehow he was still alive. "Why didn't they kill me?" he asked General Corvan, who had remained loyal even after everything collapsed. The general looked tired and defeated. "I think that's the point. They wanted us to see what they did. Dead emperors become martyrs. Living emperors who lost everything become examples." The emperor walked through the wreckage of his capital city. Millions of Zephyrians wandered the streets, confused and afraid. They had lived their entire lives as citizens of the greatest empire in the galaxy. Now they were just people on a broken planet. Commander Zalin had made a decision that would have been unthinkable a week ago. She was taking her ship to the human fleet. Her crew thought she had lost her mind, but she couldn't see any other choice. "Commander, they are probably going to kill us," Lieutenant Mordau warned. "Maybe," Zalin replied, "but staying here means dying slowly when our life support fails. At least this way, we might learn why they did this." Her ship approached the human fleet carefully, broadcasting surrender signals on all frequencies. The human ships were unlike anything she had ever seen. They moved with perfect coordination, and their weapons could probably destroy her vessel in seconds. A voice came over the communication system, speaking perfect Zephyrian. "This is Captain Amy Johnson of the Earth Defense Force. State your intentions." "I am Commander Zalin of the former Zephyrian Imperial Navy," she replied. "I request permission to speak with your commander. I was present when your people were killed 3 years ago." There was a long pause. Then the human voice spoke again. "Follow the beacon to Docking Bay 7. Come alone and unarmed." Zalin met Captain Johnson in a simple room on the human ship. The human was younger than she had expected, with calm eyes that seemed to see everything. Unlike Zephyrian officers, she wore no medals or symbols of rank. "You were there when they destroyed our ship," Captain Johnson said. "It wasn't a question." "Yes," Zalin replied. "I tried to warn my superiors that your people were different, but no one listened." "Different how?" Zalin thought carefully before answering. "Your captain wasn't afraid. Most species beg for mercy or make threats when we capture them. But he just seemed sad, like he was sorry for what was going to happen to us." Captain Johnson nodded. "Captain Morrison was a good man. He didn't want this war any more than we did." "Then why did you do it?" Zalin asked. "Your people could have hidden. You could have avoided us entirely." "Because you would have done it again," Captain Johnson replied simply. "To us, to other species, to anyone who couldn't defend themselves. The only way to stop the Zephyrian Empire was to end it completely." Across the galaxy, other powers were watching the destruction with growing fear. The Altean Council had been preparing to surrender to the Zephyrians when the Empire simply vanished. The Centauri Federation was canceling their own expansion plans. The Rigel Consortium was reviewing every aggressive policy they had ever written. Ambassador Carl Ross was humanity's first representative to meet with other galactic powers. He sat in a conference room with representatives from 12 different species, all of whom looked at him like he might explode at any moment. "The human position is simple," he explained calmly. "We want peaceful relations with all species. We have no interest in conquest or expansion, but we will not tolerate attacks on human vessels or citizens." The Altean representative spoke nervously. "What about the Zephyrian territories? Will humans claim them?" "No," Ka replied. "Those worlds belong to the people who live on them. We'll help them establish their own governments if they want our help. If they don't, we'll leave them alone." The other representatives exchanged glances. This was unprecedented. No galactic power had ever conquered an empire just to give the territory away. Intelligence Officer Mektar had survived the destruction of the capital. He was now working with human forces, helping them understand Zephyrian technology and culture. It was strange serving the people who had destroyed his empire, but he was beginning to understand why they had done it. "Your intelligence gathering was remarkable," he told Agent Danny Walsh. "You knew our empire better than we did." Danny was examining Zephyrian communication equipment. "We had to understand you to stop you. The more we learned about your empire, the more we realized negotiation was impossible. Why? Mektar asked. Because your entire culture was built on the idea that might makes right. You couldn't conceive of a species that was stronger than you but didn't want to rule you. On a dozen former Zephyrian worlds, human ships were distributing supplies and medical aid. Dr. Lisa Carter, who had survived the destruction of the New Horizon in a rescue pod that was never found, was now coordinating humanitarian efforts. The local population is grateful but confused, she reported to Admiral Cross. They keep asking when we're going to start enslaving them. What do you tell them? Admiral Cross asked. That humans don't keep slaves. We don't rule other species. We just wanted the Zephyrians to stop hurting people. The psychological impact was spreading across the galaxy faster than the news of the Empire's destruction. Every aggressive species was reconsidering their expansion plans. Every peaceful species was wondering if they should ask for human protection. Commander Zalin had been given a choice. She could take her ship and crew to any former Zephyrian world to help with reconstruction, or she could return to her home planet to live as a civilian. She chose to stay and help. Why? Captain Johnson asked. Because I want to understand how you did this, Zalin replied. Not the technology or the tactics. I want to understand how an entire species can be this disciplined. You could rule the galaxy now, but you're choosing not to. Ruling the galaxy wasn't the mission, Captain Johnson explained. The mission was ending the threat. Mission accomplished. As she worked alongside human forces, Zalin began to understand something that terrified and amazed her. The destruction of the Zephyrian Empire hadn't been an act of war. It had been an act of pest control. 6 months after the fall of the Zephyrian Empire, the galaxy looked completely different. Where once there had been conquered worlds and enslaved populations, now there were dozens of independent governments trying to build peaceful societies. President Amanda Rodriguez stood before the newly formed Galactic Council, addressing representatives from over 50 different species. The Great Hall was built on a neutral world, designed to be a place where all species could meet as equals. Humanity seeks no territory in space, she said clearly. We ask for no tribute, no special privileges, and no control over other worlds. We want only what we have always wanted, the right to explore space in peace. The assembled representatives listened carefully. Many of them had seen the recordings of what happened to the Zephyrian Empire. They understood that humanity's request for peaceful coexistence was not really a request at all. Ambassador Kyle Ross had become humanity's primary diplomat. He worked patiently with species that had never imagined living without a powerful empire controlling them. Teaching them about democracy and independence was slow work, but it was necessary. Freedom is harder than slavery, he explained to a group of former Zephyrian subjects. When someone else makes all your decisions, you don't have to think. Now you have to choose your own leaders, make your own laws, and solve your own problems. Dr. Lisa Carter had established medical stations throughout the former empire. Human doctors worked alongside local healers to treat diseases that had been ignored under Zephyrian rule. The aliens were amazed that humans would help them without asking for anything in return. Why do you do this? Asked Dr. Nalsef, a Rigelian physician who worked with Lisa's team. Because it's the right thing to do, Lisa replied simply. On Earth, we learned long ago that helping others makes everyone stronger. Captain Amy Johnson now commanded humanity's patrol fleets. Human ships moved through the galaxy not as conquerors but as peacekeepers. They protected trade routes, helped settle disputes between worlds, and made sure no new empires rose to replace the Zephyrians. Her ships carried a simple message painted on their hulls. New Horizon remembered. It was a promise to the 200 people who had died, and a warning to anyone who might threaten peaceful explorers. The memorial on Earth had become a place of pilgrimage for humans and aliens alike. Captain Jake Morrison's final words were carved in stone in a dozen languages. We don't seek war, but when war finds us, we don't just win. We ensure it never happens again. Admiral Helen Cross visited the memorial regularly. She had commanded the forces that ended an empire, but she took no pride in the destruction. The victory had been necessary, not glorious. Do you ever regret what we did? Dr. Sam Taylor asked her one day as they stood before the memorial. No, Helen replied, but I regret that it was necessary. The Zephyrians could have chosen peace. They chose to murder our people instead. Commander Zalin had become something unique in galactic history, a former enemy officer working to help her conquerors build peace. She led a team of ex-Ephirian military personnel who helped human forces understand the complex politics of the former empire. The irony is incredible, she told Agent Danny Walsh as they reviewed reports from the outer sectors. The Zephyrian Empire lasted 1,000 years by using fear to control people. Humanity destroyed it in 3 days and now rules through kindness. We don't rule at all, Danny corrected gently. That's the point. But Zalin knew better. Humanity did rule the galaxy, just not in any way that previous powers had understood. They ruled through the simple knowledge that crossing them meant complete destruction. No species wanted to test human patience twice. The psychological effect was more powerful than any army. When disputes arose between worlds, both sides would ask themselves the same question: what would the humans think? The answer usually led to peaceful solutions. Intelligence Officer Mektar had written a detailed report on humanity's methods for the new Galactic archives. His analysis had become required reading for every diplomatic school in known space. Humans fight wars to end wars, he wrote. They do not seek glory or conquest. They seek solutions. This makes them more dangerous than any empire because they cannot be negotiated with, bribed, or deterred once they decide you are a problem. The report's inclusion had become famous throughout the galaxy. Other species fight to win. Humans fight to finish. Former Emperor Korthak lived quietly on his homeworld, tending a small garden outside the ruins of his palace. Human aid workers had offered to rebuild the palace, but he had refused. He preferred the reminder of what happened when empires grew too proud. Young Zephyrians often came to ask him about the old days. He always told them the same thing. The empire fell because we forgot that strength without wisdom is just destruction waiting to happen. The humans showed us the difference. The galaxy had entered an unprecedented era of peace. Trade flourished between worlds that had once been enemies. Scientific knowledge was shared freely instead of being hoarded by empires. Art and culture flowed across space like never before. But everyone understood that this peace existed because of human strength. The species that called themselves explorers had proven they were the most efficient killers the galaxy had ever seen. They had ended a 1,000-year empire in 3 days and then offered medical aid to their enemies. Admiral Cross received daily reports from human ships scattered across the galaxy. The reports were mostly routine. Trade disputes settled, pirates captured, scientific expeditions protected. The ordinary work of keeping peace in a dangerous universe. But attached to every report was a simple reminder, standing by to solve problems. The message was clear to every species in the galaxy. Humanity would help those who wanted peace and destroy those who threatened it. There was no middle ground, no negotiation, no second chances. Captain Johnson's patrols had become legendary. Pirates would surrender the moment they detected human ships. Aggressive species would reconsider expansion plans when human vessels appeared in their systems. The mere presence of a human ship was enough to prevent conflicts. The galaxy had learned the most important lesson in its history. When humans said something was inadvisable, they weren't making a threat. They were offering the last chance to avoid a solution. And everyone had seen what human solutions looked like. The Zephyrian Empire was gone. The New Horizon was remembered. And the galaxy was at peace because no one wanted to discover what would happen if they made humanity solve another problem. Peace through superior firepower had become peace through the certainty of total consequences. The humans had kept their promise. War, as they practiced it, never happened again.